Hello, everyone. I am going to be giving a presentation today about my Beagle family. This presentation was originally given back in 2021 to family members, and I am now recording this presentation that will be uploaded to YouTube so that it can reach a broader audience. So let's start with talking about my maternal grandfather, Howard Weinberger, and his recollections of his Beagle family. So Howard knew a lot about his father's family, which the surnames there are Weinberger and Hollander. In fact, he comes from a very large Weinberger family that were very close and would get together, as frequent as once a month. And so he really grew up knowing a lot about his Weinberger family, and he knew also about his paternal grandmother, Rose Hollander, and her family, and both the Weinberger and Hollander families were from Slovakia. But, when it came to his mother, whose name was Frida Unger, my grandfather Howard really didn't know a whole lot about either side of his mother's family. So his Frida's father, whose name was Louis Unger, he was orphaned at an early age. And for a long time, we didn't really know much about his family. I would say, back 3 years ago, his ancestry remained the biggest brick wall in our family tree. It probably still is today, but less or so, because we have been able to find out more information about where he grew up and a little bit more about his family. But that is on the father's side. That was Frida's father. That was Howard's maternal grandfather. Now, Frida's mother, her name was Jennie Biegel, and her Yiddish name was Shandel. And again, that's where the Beagle family is from. It's my maternal grandfather, Howard Weinberger's maternal grandmother's family, and his maternal grandmother was Jennie Shandel Biegel. So what did Howard remember or recollect about Jennie's family? Well, there were basically three things that he knew about this family, and there were three clues. So the first one is he knew that there was someone on Jennie's side of the family whose name was Uncle Dave, who lived on Riverside Drive in Manhattan and owned a parking garage on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And he knew that Uncle Dave, was married to Tilly. So that was one person who he knew was a relative. The second clue that he remembered, was he knew he had a cousin with the last name Raps who owned a pharmacy in New Jersey and who was definitely from the Beagle side. And then the last clue he had is that he knew also of another uncle named Pesach Beigel. And he remembered a picture of him with a beard that was in his parents' home. But unfortunately, that picture got lost. So these were three clues that my grandfather had about the family, but that was pretty much all that we had to go on. And so at first, I tried to make use of those clues, but I didn't make a lot of headway using traditional genealogy research alone. And so from then, I moved on to using autosomal DNA to try and solve this puzzle of who Jennie Biegel's family members were. So again, just on the right-hand side of the page here, we do see a picture of Jennie Biegel. We don't have a lot of pictures of her, but this is what she looked like. This is Howard's grandmother. All right, here's a representation of what my grandfather knew about his extended Beagle family when we started out this research. So you can see my grandfather here, and these are his two parents, and Frida's parents, Louis Unger and Jennie Biegel. And my grandfather knew that he had an Aunt Sally Unger who had one daughter who was my grandfather's only first cousin, whose name was Muriel Knobloch, and she still lives in New York City. But that was the one first cousin that he had. He didn't know about any other family members. This was basically the extent of the tree when we began the research. All right. So traditional genealogy wasn't checking out for me based off of the limited information, and so I turned to autosomal DNA testing to try and see if this could lead to a breakthrough. So autosomal DNA testing is the predominant type of commercial DNA testing available. It's the one that most people have heard of. So there are several different companies that offer this type of DNA testing. The biggest ones are, Ancestry, MyHeritage, 23andMe, and Family Tree DNA. So what does autosomal DNA testing do? It looks at your autosomes, or the 22 pairs of chromosomes aside from the sex chromosome. And it looks at, it uses a DNA array to look at hundreds of thousands of positions. It doesn't look at your entire chromosomes, but it looks at areas where there is, variance and difference between human beings. Since most humans share a good percentage of their DNA, over 99%. So they look at the areas where there are differences across those 22 pairs. And then they can compare your DNA to others and to look at how much shared DNA you have across those locations. So the more DNA shared between you and another person, the more closely you are related. And the amount of DNA overlap, it is measured in a unit called centimorgans, which is the cm. And so what an autosomal DNA analysis will look at will be the total shared cm, the total shared centimorgans between matches. And then we also want to look at the length of particular shared segments. So the longer the shared segment you share with someone, the more meaningful it is, and it also can represent, closer relationships. So we look at the total amount and then the individual lengths of segments. So in general, autosomal DNA testing is most useful for finding third cousins or closer. And the reason for that is, autosomal DNA is looking at all parts of your ancestry. So you get 50% of your DNA from your father, 50% from your mother, about 25% from your grandparents, about 12.5% from your great-grandparents, and so forth. So as you go further back in time, you get less and less DNA inherited from a specific ancestor, and it is less likely that a match will have inherited that same percentage, that same area of DNA as you. And so finding third cousins or closer is probably the easiest way to use autosomal DNA. You can use DNA to find connections that are more distant, but it takes a bit more work. I guess another point here is the Ashkenazi Jewish population presents some challenges when it comes to autosomal DNA testing, and that's due to endogamy. So endogamy is the practice of marrying within the same ethnic, cultural, social, religious, or tribal group, resulting in a population that ultimately descends from the same small gene pool. So this very much applies to Ashkenazi Jews. About a decade ago, in 2014, there was a paper out that suggested that all Ashkenazi Jews today descend from the same, as few as 330 people who lived 600 to 800 years ago. I've heard since then, as much as 1,000 people who were childbearing, who bore children. But we're talking about a very small population that was living, let's say 700 years ago, around that time. And so there isn't a lot of diversity in the gene pool that ultimately all Ashkenazi Jews share. So what you'll find as a result of endogamy is that the shared DNA between matches is inflated between Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, and it can make it difficult to do a proper analysis. And so its own specialty is doing endogamous autosomal DNA research. There are a lot of tools available for working through that. But I would say a couple things that I've found that are helpful rules of thumb. So the first is if you see anyone that has more than, like a DNA match that has more than 200 centimorgans of total shared DNA, that is not an endogamous match. That is a real connection match, almost always, and it's a traceable match, usually with a traditional genealogy. So if you see someone who has more than 200 centimorgans, that's a great sign. And then, one that's come out through practitioners of endogamous DNA research, one that I find to be very helpful as well, is you don't necessarily need to have the total shared DNA be very big, like 200, but you want to look for at least one segment that's long and is greater than 20 centimorgans. So you need one segment that's greater than 20 centimorgans, and a second segment that is also fairly long and is greater than 10 centimorgans. If you see matches that meet that criteria, they may be traceable. One last rule of thumb that's not on the slide that I like to mention is if you see a match that has a segment, an individual segment that's greater than 50 centimorgans, so here I was looking at 20 and 10, but if you find someone who has a segment greater than 50 centimorgans, almost always that is indicative of a connection of someone third cousins or closer. So that's another rule of thumb to keep in mind. If you see a match with a very long single segment, they can usually be traceable. Just finally here, segments that are shorter in length, so less than 7 centimorgans, they oftentimes can be discounted because they can be just false matches due to Jewish endogamy. So usually when we're looking at autosomal DNA matches, you want to look at segments at least more than 10 centimorgans to really look for meaningful shared DNA segments. All right, so I had my grandfather take a DNA test, and after about 6 weeks, he got his results. What did the results show? So I already previously had my uncle Mark, who is Howard's son, test, and it was very clear that from the DNA that Howard was Mark's father, and I had also previously tested, and that I was Howard's grandson. So it just proved the known connections. In about 3% of testers, people do discover instances of misattributed paternity. Usually it's on the father's side, not in my case, since Howard is my maternal grandfather. It's usually not as often, but it can happen. So there were no such concerns in our family because the DNA checked out that Howard is my grandfather and that Mark is Howard's son. The other piece of information, at a high level, indicated that Howard's DNA was that from his DNA is that he was 100% Ashkenazi Jewish. So not really a surprise there given what we knew about his ancestry, but it was confirmed through DNA testing. So what was really interesting, though, was that there were two specific DNA matches that Howard had, and they were to two sisters. Their names were Laura Cowan and Janet Fram. Both had family trees on Ancestry that showed Beigel ancestors, so that seemed a very encouraging sign. And they met some of the criteria of a pretty good match. So they had greater than 200 centimorgans in total shared DNA, which by itself is notable, and they each had at least one segment that was greater than 20 centimorgans. To me, that meant that they were traceable matches, and they seem likely to be related to Howard through the Beigel family. So I reached out separately to both Laura and Janet. And then you can see here on the slide where I talk about a very meaningful match. So this is how Howard connects to Laura on Ancestry, and this is how Howard connects to Janet Fram on Ancestry. What we want to look at are the two different criteria. So you can see the total shared DNA was 203 centimorgans with Howard and Laura. That's over 200. Same with Howard and Janet. This was even bigger at 245. And then the longest segment. So this is the longest shared segment, individual segment. For Howard and Laura, it was 45 centimorgans. For Howard and Janet, it was 35 centimorgans. This is much more than 20 centimorgans. It's not quite 50 centimorgans, but it's very significant and meant that we likely were looking at a traceable connection. Okay, so I had reached out to both of them, and then thankfully, Laura Cowan responded to my initial message. Her sister Janet also wrote to me eventually at a later point, and Laura looked through the materials in her family, and she was able to find two important documents. The first was a family tree that had been put together decades ago of the extended Beigel family, and we'll discuss more about that later in the second half of this presentation. And then there was a note about the Beigel family that included Howard's grandmother, Jennie. And we can see this note, a part of this note here, where it's listing different children, and we can see Jennie is listed here. And so several months later, I connected with another cousin named David Beigel, and he had some more information that clarified some more of the relationships. So now that I had this information from Laura and from David, I was able to use this as a springboard to more fully research the Beigel family, and I was able to really piece together all these different parts of her family. And it turns out that Jennie was part of a much larger family that any of us had known previously, but it also was complicated. So we're going to delve into Jennie Biegel's family and figure out and go into more depth about her relationships with her family members. So who was Jennie Biegel's family? Well, we learned that Jennie's father's name was Israel, also named Srul, which is like a nickname, Srul Beigel, who was born around 1860 and who died in 1923. And we actually have a picture that was sent by David Beigel of Israel Beigel. So we actually know what Israel Beigel looked like. This, again, is Howard's great-grandfather. Now, on the 1910 and 1920 censuses, Israel is listed as a seltzer and coffee peddler. So he seems to have peddled in some drinks. And Israel was married to a woman whose name wasn't known. And with this first marriage, he had 4 children. And these are the names of the 4 children from the first marriage. The oldest was Jennie. So Jennie was the oldest child out of all of her siblings. She was born around the late 1870s. And then she had 3 younger full siblings. They were David Beigel, 1883 to 1956, Jacob Beigel, who was born in the 1880s and died in 1920, and then a younger sister named Sarah Beigel Mingione, who was born in the late 1880s and died in 1952. So she had 3 full siblings, and they're all products of the first marriage that Israel Beigel had. Then Israel Beigel's first wife passed away. And what's interesting is he then remarried his first wife's younger sister, who we know was named Fanny. So Israel and Fanny had 6 additional children who were all Jennie's half-siblings. But the way I like to think about it is they were half-siblings, but from a DNA standpoint, because Israel Beigel's second wife was a full sister of the first wife, Israel's children from the second marriage are more closely related. So what I like to say is that those half-siblings are really 3/4 siblings. There's a lot more DNA in common than what we would normally see between half-siblings. So those 6 children from the second marriage, their names were Celia, Zipporah Beigel Raps, then Bertha Basha Beigel Elpert, Hannah Beigel, Max or Mendel Beigel, Irving Isaac Beigel, and Moses or Mo Beigel. So altogether, Israel Srul Beigel had 10 children. Jennie was the oldest. There were 4 from the first wife, 2 from the second wife. The first, and they were all 3/4 siblings between the two, the siblings between the 2 wives, because the 2 wives were siblings. And so again, it was indicative of a closer connection from a DNA standpoint. Okay, so let's talk about Israel Beigel's first wife. So, initially we didn't know what her name was, but I was able to figure it out based off of marriage records from some of the siblings. So first I was able to find Jennie Biegel's brother Jacob Biegel's marriage record here to Fanny Schoenfeld in 1908. And over here it says that her mother's name was Frida Berggren. So that you can see Israel Beigel was the father, and the mother over here is Frida Berggren. And then we see something similar here with the younger sister Sarah Beigel, who married Felice Mingione. So we can see here Israel Beigel for the father's name, and the mother's name is listed as Frida Greenberg. So we see the name Frida on both of these documents, so we can be pretty sure that Israel Biegel's first wife was named Frida. I subsequently have been able to figure out that the last name, even though we see it here as Berggren and Greenberg, it was Berggren. That was the name, and it was just flipped around on this marriage record, but that Frida's maiden name was Berggren, and she was married to Israel Beigel. Now, what's interesting, right, is that, Howard's mother's name is Frida, and Jennie's brother, David, had a daughter named Frances, and it is indicative, right, of this common name of Frida, who had passed away earlier, the first wife having passed away. It turns out that Howard's mother, Frida, also had an ancestor, Frida, on the Unger side, so it's unclear who she might be named after, or if she's named after both of these women. All right, so I gave an overview about the full siblings and the three-quarter siblings. Let's start here with talking about Jennie's full siblings. And in the top left corner, you can see a picture of David Beigel. And this is the Uncle Dave that Howard had remembered visiting as a child. And it was true. David owned a garage on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and he probably was the only sibling who Jennie's family kept in touch with. And again, they were closest in age, Jennie and David, but that is a branch of the family that were in touch with each other. And we have a nice picture of this from Howard's wedding in 1956. We see that Uncle Dave attended the wedding. The next child, Jacob Jake Beigel, we know that Jacob worked as a trolley car conductor, and unfortunately, at one point, he was hit on the head by a falling iron bar, and he died after a stay in the psych ward at Kings County Hospital in Brooklyn. So we actually have here his World War I registration card, which states that he is in the hospital for mental diseases, and he is unable to sign the card. So he had a real tragic fate. Now, Jacob did have children, and he had a grandson named Jim Fallick, who was a famous architect who lived in Houston. And to his credit are over $4 billion worth of facilities in 39 states and a number of foreign countries. So he had a grandson who was well known. And then finally, the youngest full sibling of Jennie was Sarah Beigel Mingione. And Sarah was the only one of Jennie's siblings who married out of the Jewish faith, and she married an Italian-born Felice Mingione, who was a barber. The family lived in Bayonne, New Jersey, which is where Jennie was living for a number of years, and then the Mingione family moved to Plainfield, New Jersey. So when I first presented this back in 2021, I had not connected with any descendants from Sarah's family. I have since been able to connect with two individuals, Sarah's granddaughter, Roberta McClutchy, and also a great-granddaughter named Melissa Lindros. And Melissa was able to send me this picture. Again, this was just earlier this year, of Sarah Beigel. Now, she was a hunchback. We know that she was a hunchback, and apparently she had trouble breathing at times because of that. But both Roberta and Melissa had very favorable things to say about their ancestor Sarah, and it's pretty amazing to be able to have connected with this branch of the family. Again, these were all full siblings of Jennie, both David and Sarah. So that was Israel Beigel's first wife. Now, he then married Frieda's sister after Frieda passed away. And the accounts from Laura and from Laura Cowan and David Beigel were that Israel's second wife, Fanny, died in a tragic fire accident. And now there were differences in accounts as to how this happened, whether it was a boiler accident, whether it happened in a mikveh bathhouse or a bakery, but there was some fire that happened and she passed away. So I still have not been able to verify which version of this is correct, but it is true that the second wife, Fanny, died in a fire. I was able to find her death certificate, which is listed here, dated to 9th of April, 1912. And it is unfortunately hard to read the writing here with the cause of death. But we can see that if you look at very closely over here, that it says burning of body. So at least that is what I can read from it. It looks like that she was burnt from a fire. Hopefully, I'm hoping that I can find out more information about this at some later point. So far, I have not found out any more information about the circumstances of the second wife, Fanny's death. So now let's talk about some of Jennie's half-siblings and start with her half-sisters. Again, they're technically her three-quarter sisters, but we'll refer to them here as half-sisters from the second wife, Fanny. So the first was Celia Beigel Rapps. So Celia's son, Alfred Rapps, was a pharmacist who owned a pharmacy in Plainfield, New Jersey. And this is something that Howard had remembered about Rapps owning a pharmacy. Well, this was Alfred Rapps's family business. Now, the business was ultimately sold in the 1980s, but it still exists today under the name Rapps Pharmacy. You can go to Plainfield, New Jersey and see that. So here is a picture from 2018 of the Rapps Pharmacy in Plainfield, New Jersey. So that checked out. That was one of the clues that Howard had about his Beigel family, and we were able to figure out how that connected. That it was through Jennie's half-sister Celia and her son Alfred. Okay. The next sister was Bertha Beigel Alpert. She's the only sibling to not have had children of her own, and she lived in Brookline, Massachusetts. And then her other half-sister was Hannah Beigel. Now, Hannah was married to a Beigel family cousin named David Beigel, who immigrated to the United States from Krakow, Poland, which was then part of Galicia in the Austrian Empire. And David Beigel, the cousin, he immigrated to the United States in 1913. We're going to talk a little bit more about this Krakow family in a little bit, but he's part of the extended Beigel family, and Hannah married David from this branch of the family. And I've corresponded with Hannah's two grandchildren, who I mentioned before, Laura Cowan and Janet Fram. We now know how they connect. They are Howard's half-second cousins, or you could call them Howard's three-quarters second cousins. Okay. So we talked about some of the half-sisters, but there were also younger half-brothers that Jennie had. And after Fanny's death in 1912, the two youngest children, they were the twins Irving and Mo, they were placed in the Hebrew Sheltering Guardian Society Orphan Asylum, located in Pleasantville, New York in Westchester County. You can see a picture of the campus here, circa 1900, of the orphan asylum. It looked like a very picturesque setting in Westchester County. So what did the orphanage do? It took in Jewish orphans or children whose parents could not properly care for them. So the latter was the case for Irving and Mo, because their father, Israel, Srul, he was still alive, but he could not take care of these two young children on his own. And it was said that no one in the family had room for the twins, and so they had to go to this orphan asylum. Now, we also know that Irving and Mo ran away from the orphan asylum at the age of 14. There are records from this asylum in Manhattan, at the Center for Jewish History Archives. This is an area of potential further research, because we probably could find more information about Irving and Mo, the two youngest siblings, in these records. All right, so I think this is a good time to summarize here some of the findings of the siblings of Jennie Biegel, which was the first major discovery in researching the Beigel family. So first, we found out that, Jennie's parents' names were Israel or Srul Beigel and Frida Bergrun. And that was really the names of her father and mother. And that from this first marriage that Israel had to Frida, they had, 4 children. Oldest was Jennie, then was David, that's Uncle Dave, and this is also David Beigel, who corresponded with me. This is his great-grandfather, who was married to Tilly. And then there was Jake Beigel, and then there was Sarah Beigel, married to Felice Mingione. And these 4, children were from the first marriage to Israel Beigel. And then as we go on to the next slide here, this is a representation of the families from the second wife, who was Frida's sister, Fanny Bergrun, who died in 1912 in the fire. And we have here the names of the children and their spouses: Celia Beigel, Bertha Beigel, Hannah Beigel, who married her cousin David Beigel. And again, Hannah Beigel is the grandmother of Laura Cowan and Janet Fram. So this is where the DNA connection was being seen, was through here. And then we have Max Mendel Beigel, and then we have the twins, Mo Beigel and Irving Beigel. So this is a representation, again, of all of the branches of Jennie's siblings' families. There are 10 children in all, so it really is a lot to cover. Okay, so we sort of had discussed the first 2 clues that my grandfather had remembered. He remembered that he had the Uncle Dave, and he remembered about the Raps Pharmacy, and through Jennie's siblings, we were able to figure out those connections. But there was still this Uncle Pesach Beigel who Howard remembered, but didn't fit into this sibling picture. Who was this Pesach Beigel? And so for a long time after I initially found Jennie's siblings' families, I still had no idea who Pesach Beigel was. And then finally, I stumbled upon Pesach's grave from 1942. So on the right-hand side, we can see this picture of the grave, and it's written in Hebrew aside for his name, Pesach Beigel. And I have a translation of the grave inscription here, and I'll read it. Our uncle, a man wholesome and honest, who walks in wholeness and acts in righteousness, who fears God his whole life, a light unto the learned students, Pesach, son of Menachem Mendel, and who died in 1942. So what did we find from this grave? As we often do with graves that have Hebrew on them, it will list the name of the deceased and the name of the father's name, at least the first name of the father. And so we find that Pesach's father was a man named Menachem Mendel. And it turns out, I already knew, that Israel, Srul Beigel's father, was Menachem Mendel. And so what we were looking at here was that Pesach Beigel was Israel Beigel's brother and was Jennie Biegel's uncle. So, we had started with looking at Jennie Biegel's siblings. Pesach Beigel was not related to that, but Pesach Beigel was Jennie's paternal uncle. So this is going back another generation. And another interesting thing from this grave is that it made clear there were no surviving children. Again, it's listed here with Dodenu here at the top, our uncle. So if he had had kids, his children would have said our father on there. But it was his nieces and nephews who helped to make this grave and monument in the cemetery. So what do we know about Pesach? Well, once I was able to add him to the tree, I was able to find information about him. Pesach was a butcher, and I found references to him in New York City from as early as 1883, which is when he came to New York City from Europe. So once I found Pesach Beigel's grave, it led me to finding out his wife and finding her grave. And so I found her grave and death record from 1936. So the wife predeceased Pesach by about 6 years. And Pesach's wife's name was Lena, or Leah Unger Beigel. And on the grave here, we see her Hebrew name was Leah Dobra. And it says that she was the daughter of a man named Asher Anshel. Asher Anshel. And that was a familiar name to me because this was the same name as Louis Anger's father. So who was Louis Anger? Louis Anger was Jennie's husband. So Jennie's husband, Louis Anger, seemed to have been the sister of Pesach Beigel's wife. So what we're seeing here were these connections between the Anger and Beigel family in two different branches of the family. So the two Anger children, Louis and Lena, or Leah, they both married into the Beigel family. We had two Angers marrying two Beigels, which was very helpful to me because, again, I knew very little about Louis Anger's family. I immediately was able to find a sister who I didn't know much about. The story, I guess we will discuss this on the next slide. But the death record also listed the name of Louis and Leah's mother, and her name was Frida. And so beforehand, we didn't know at all Louis Anger's mother's name, but her name was also Frida. So Howard's mother, Frida, could be named after both Frida Anger, who was Louis's mother, or it could have been Jennie's mother, who was Frida Bergerun, who also was named Frida. So both of, Howard's mother's, Frida's grandmothers were named Frida, and she's probably named after both of them. So these were the death certificates where we found out, again, the Asher Anshel and the name Frida. So here we have from Leah Beigel's death record, we see the Anshel Unger and the mother's name, Frida Cohen. At the time, when I gave this presentation back a few years ago, I thought that Louis Anger's mother's name was Frida Cohen. But I've been able to find some more information since then, and we actually know that this last name was actually Riegelhaupt. That was actually her surname, and it probably was not known at the time. Whoever was supplying this information at Leah's death, which was presumably Leah's husband Pesach, he didn't list Riegelhaupt on here. He just listed the name Cohen, but her name was definitely Riegelhaupt. And then here we have Pesach's death certificate on the right side, and another important document because it lists the father's name as Mendel, which we know was Menachem Mendel, but it also lists the mother's name, which we never had known before. And Israel Beigel and Pesach Beigel's mother's name was Zlata Miral. This is a name that I hadn't known before, but it appears a lot in the Beigel family, and so now we know the source for this name, Zlata Miral. It was Menachem Mendel's wife's name. And then finally, this is something, again, that only came about this year, but I did not have a picture for Pesach Beigel or know what he looked like. My grandfather remembered there being a picture in his parents' home of a bearded man named Pesach Beigel who was in his house. But when I heard from Melissa Lindros, from a descendant of Sarah Beigel Mingione, she was able to find a picture of Pesach Beigel in her family belongings, and she emailed this picture of Pesach Beigel to me. So we have this really beautiful picture of Pesach Beigel, who was Jennie Biegel's uncle, and it's pretty amazing to have a picture of not only Jennie Biegel's father, Israel Beigel, which was shown on a previous slide, but also Israel Beigel's brother, Pesach Beigel. And both of them immigrated to the United States. I wanted to just spend a minute or two more about the connection to Louis Anger here. So Louis Anger was Jennie Biegel's husband, as mentioned before, and I talked about the story that he had been orphaned at a young age. During his parents apparently died during an epidemic in Europe. He came to New York City, and the story was he was raised by an older sister. So when I was researching Louis Anger, I tried to find any information about who this older sister could have been to try and prove out this potential connection, and I had no success with that. But it was only through my research with a separate family Louis Unger's wife's family, Jennie Biegel's family, that I actually was able to find Louis Unger's sister, whose name was Lena. And so he definitely did live with his sister. Here on the right, we see a census called the 1890 New York City Police Census. So in 1890, there was also a U.S. federal census, but it later burned down. And so we don't really have any records from that 1890 census. The good news is, if you have any ancestors that were living in New York City in 1890, there was a separate census run by the New York City Police that will have limited information about people living there, but it will serve as a backup, resource for finding people in 1890. And so in this record, in the census in 1890, we see Louis Unger over here. So that is, Jennie's future husband. And he's living with Pesach Beigel and Lena Biegel. He's actually living with his sister and brother-in-law, Pesach Beigel, who was Jennie's uncle, and his sister Lena. Also worth pointing out here too is there's another name that was listed here, and again back when I gave this presentation, I didn't even look at that piece of information, but she's also living with these individuals, and her name is Rebecca Riegelhaupt. It turns out she was a cousin of Lewis's as well, from the Riegelhaupt side. So you have all these family members living together in this 1890 census. So it was pretty amazing to be able to find this record showing this connection, and that Louis Unger was living with the Beigel family, before he even got married to Pesach's niece, Jennie. Okay, so here is a summary of information about this Pesach Beigel and the Unger family connection. So this is viewed through the Unger family side. So we have the two parents of Louis Unger. Louis Unger's over here. His parents, Asher Anschel and Frieda Riegelhaupt. Louis is married to Jennie Biegel. Louis and Jennie are Howard's grandparents. Now, Louis had an older sister named Lena or Leah, and she was married to Pesach Beigel. So the way to remember it here is Louis and Leah and Lena, they were brother and sister. But Pesach and Jennie, they were uncle and niece. And most likely, Louis ended up marrying Jennie because he had this connection to the Beigel family through his sister's marriage. That seems most likely the case, is why the two of them would get together, would be that, his sister was already married into the Beigel family, and so he did as well. He married Pesach's niece, Jennie. The last thing here on this slide, not related to the Beigel family, but also a new discovery from this past year, was I was able to find another full sibling of Louis Unger, who never came to the United States, and who died in Poland in Europe. And that can be, more on that can be in another presentation at a later point. But it was very exciting being able to find that, and to find living descendants today from this sister, Esther Mindel, because Leah and Pesach didn't have any children, so there are no living descendants today. But Louis Unger did have a sister who was also married to a Riegelhaupt, and they do have living descendants today, which is very exciting. Okay, so we talked about Jennie Biegel and her full siblings and her half siblings / three-quarter siblings, and we also learned about one of the uncles that she had named Pesach Beigel. So where was Israel Beigel, her father? Where was he from in Europe? And so again, for a while, this was a challenge for me. I couldn't figure out where they came from in Europe. But I knew to start out that they were from this southern region of Poland called Galicia, which was then part of the Austria-Hungarian Empire. So there were records that mentioned Galicia, and so I knew that it most likely was referring to southern Poland, but I had trouble finding any records for Israel Beigel. But once I found Pesach, which again was at a later point, it helped lead me to find his passenger record. And so that passenger record mentioned that Pesach departed Hamburg, Germany, and came to New York City in 1883. After finding Pesach's departure record, I was able to find Israel Beigel's arrival record as well. And also his brother Osias or Yehoshua Beigel, and he was the first one to arrive in 1880. So altogether, there were these three brothers, Beigel brothers, who all came to America in the 1880s. And interestingly, on all of these documents, on all of these departure records, the Beigel brothers claim to have come from the same town. And this town was called Rupshitz in Galicia. So if we look here, this is in 1886. This is Israel Beigel's passenger record. So this is Jennie's father coming to America. This is leaving Hamburg. So that's why the records here are in German. And he lists his age and also lists where is he coming from. He's coming from the town of, he was born in the town of Rupshitz. What is Rupshitz? Well, Rupshitz was a small shtetl, and it was made most famous for the town where a rabbi named Naftali Tzvi Horovitz lived. Now, he lived a long time ago. He lived from 1760 to 1827. But Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Horovitz, he was the founder of the Rupshitz Hasidic dynasty. It was a very big Hasidic dynasty. It still exists today in a smaller form, but the current Rupshitzer Rebbe lives in Borough Park in Brooklyn today. So there's, that's how the town is well known. What is very interesting to me personally is I am related to Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Horovitz through my Reuben family. So I already have presented about this, but if you look at part 3 and part 4 of my Reuben family series, I discuss how I discovered a potential connection to Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Horovitz, and then I tested it out through Y-DNA testing in the 4th presentation. And so we actually know for a fact that I descend from Naftali Tzvi Horovitz's first cousin. So I already had a connection to this town from earlier through that family, but now I have direct ancestors who also lived in this town in the 19th century. So unfortunately, civil records don't exist in Rupshitz, which accounts for the lack of documentation in Europe for Israel Beigel. So we're really very fortunate that we have these departure records. So in most places in Europe where people sailed from, they did not keep the departure records. They didn't keep them or maintain them, and so they've been lost to history. It just turns out for Hamburg, they do have these records that they still exist today. So if you have an ancestor who sailed from Hamburg to America, you really want to search the departure records because they will list the town of origin for your family, where they most likely will not be listed when they come to America. They won't list a specific town. On these Hamburg records, they will. And so it was just extremely fortunate that all 3 of these Beigel brothers, they all sailed from Hamburg, and all of their, original, birth towns, they were listed on these records. Very, very fortunate, especially because there are no existing civil records for this town today. Okay, so here is a map of Rupshitz in southern Poland. This is like the general region, so you can see all the neighboring countries in Central and Eastern Europe. And over here in the bottom right, you see a closer map of Rupshitz over here. And, to the west is Krakow, to the east is Lvov in western Ukraine today. It was sort of like halfway in between those two towns. And we can see here the time line of the Beigel family members, the Beigel brothers, of them arriving in the United States. So first we had Yehoshua in 1880. In late 1883, we have Pesach Beigel, that's, Israel Beigel's brother. And then Israel Beigel comes in 1886. Now what's interesting is that I was able to find a second record for Israel Beigel in 1896, also coming back to New York. What explains that? Well, almost certainly this was related to, coming back to, he went back to Europe to marry the second wife, Fanny, and then they came back to New York after that. So he married Frida, the first wife died, and then he went back to Galicia and married Frida's sister, Fanny, and then he returned to America. So we see actually 2 trips across the Atlantic for Israel Beigel. And this is a nice postcard I found of Rupshitz in 1908. So it's a little bit after, the Israel Beigel was living there, but not too long afterwards. And you can see that this is in southern Poland. It's in the foothills of the Carpathian Mountains. It's a very, very picturesque countryside, and with the town located there. All right. So we've talked about where Israel Beigel was from, and we talked about two of his brothers, Pesach and Yoshua. They came to New York City. Well, it turns out there was a lot more to this family, and this was helped by having this family tree that Laura Cowan sent to me that listed other siblings of Israel Beigel, and none of these other ones came to New York City. They remained in Europe. So what have I been able to find so far? I can say there were at least 9 children that Israel's parents, Menachem Mendel and Zlata Mirel, had. So we talked about Israel Beigel having 10 children. Well, Israel was one of 9 children. So this is, again, a very big Beigel family. So the first few are ones that we've already discussed about: Israel Beigel, Pesach, and Yoshua. And then there was Abraham Eliezer. We're going to talk about him more. Asher Yeshaya. There was Yitzchak Beigel. We're going to talk about him a little bit. There's Chaim Aaron Beigel. There's one sibling who we don't know the name for, and then a sister, a daughter who was Israel Beigel's sister, Chaya Rivka Beigel Seawald. Okay, so the last name of Beigel can be listed as either Bet Yud Gimel Lamed or Bet Yud Yud Gimel Lamed, and it can be spelled in various ways in Latin script. So most of the family members that came to remained in Poland, they ended up spelling their last name Beigel, Beigel. Now, the 3 Beigel brothers, when they came to the United States, they were sort of the outliers. So Israel alternated between spelling it Beigel or Biegel, and the latter, this Biegel, not Beigel, it was this Biegel spelling that was ultimately adopted by our branch of the family. And they ended up being adopted also by the 2 brothers, Yoshua and Pesach. So you see the spelling Biegel for the siblings that came to America, and those that stayed in Europe used Beigel. And it appears that our branch may have adopted the Yiddish spelling of the name Beigel with the Eins and then translated it into English. So that could be the source for why it's spelled as B-I-E. But again, they're all from the same family. And so however you spell it, either as Beigel or Beigel, they were all siblings from the same family. So this is, part of the family tree that I had mentioned that Laura Cowan had sent to me. So you can see in the center here was Menachem Mendel Beigel, and there were 5 children in this tree listed. I have since found 4 additional children, so there are at least 9, but you can see some of their names here. And you can see in this tree here that this question mark actually is referring to Israel Beigel. This is definitely Israel Beigel. This Abraham Eliezer you can see is a big, big tree, and we're going to talk about that. That was a very big branch of the family. Okay, so where did the Beigel family live in Poland? So they were from Galicia, which was an area of southern Poland. Was part of, back in the 19th century, it was again part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And there basically were 2 regions within Galicia where our family was living. Some were, further west around the city of Krakow, and then others were further east in Poland. So you can see like a branch. These are different colors representing different children of Menachem Mendel and where they were living. But over here in black is Rupshitz, and 5 of the 9 Beigel family children can be traced to the town of Rupshitz. So it's almost certain that the Beigel family was originally living in Rupshitz, and then some of the children moved to other various towns. So I list over here the towns where different family members were found. The biggest branch so far that on my tree is all these blue dots. That's Abraham or Abraham Eliezer, Beigel's family, and they were centered around the town of Krakow, and we will talk about that. And then from the eastern families, you've got a couple siblings, but most notably, Yitzchak Beigel was listed here in the towns of Rozvadov and Gribov. Okay. So now we're going to talk about other siblings of Israel Beigel. We talked about Pesach and Yehoshua, the ones who came to New York, but there were brothers and siblings who did not come to America. And the largest branch of this family was Abraham Eliezer. Okay, that was the brother of Israel Beigel. And what do we know about his descendants? Well, we know that a lot of Abraham Eliezer's descendants ended up settling. First, Abraham Eliezer, he himself settled in the town of Mizlinus, south of Krakow, in the second half of the 1800s. And then several of Abraham Eliezer's children, they moved to Krakow, which was a larger city in Galicia in the late 19th century and early 20th century. Now, many of these Krakow Beigels became bakers. That was their profession. And they ran bakeries throughout the city of Krakow up until World War II. So this is a 1908 Krakow Address and Business Directory that I found, and it lists 3 Beigels. They are all Beigel brothers. Joseph over here, Wolf and Jacob, or Jacob Isaac. Now, all 3 of them are listed as piekarnia. Now, piekarnia means bakery. So that was their business, is that they each ran bakeries in Krakow. Again, these are all 3 siblings, children of Abraham Eliezer. These 3 Beigel bakers, they would be Jennie Biegel's first cousins. Okay. So I also wanted to touch on the Holocaust testimonials because many of the Beigel family members who remained in Poland, they perished during the Holocaust, especially from this branch of the family of Abraham Eliezer. So the USC Shoah Foundation has interviewed many Holocaust survivors, and these interviews can be accessed online. Several of our Beigel family members who were from Krakow were interviewed as part of this effort. So one of them was named Abraham Goldstein, who lived from 1924 to 2007, and he survived the Holocaust along with his older brother. This is Abraham Goldstein over here in the top left. And then in the bottom left, we have Paula Gronberg-Susswein. She lived from 1922 to 2021, and she survived the Holocaust along with 2 of her sisters. And Paula's grandson, Jonathan Gruber, is an American director of documentary films. And in 2001, he directed a documentary called Paula's March, in which Paula returned to Poland along with a group of teenage students. So it's important to note that both Abraham and Paula, these are Howard's cousins from the Abraham Eliezer branch of the family who survived the Holocaust and were interviewed in the 1990s and talked about their family. And both of them were from Krakow. Okay, so now we're going to listen to a short clip talking about the close-knit family that Abraham Goldstein grew up with all of his Beigel family members.
Mr. Goldstein, when you think about your childhood home, what images come to your mind?
Well, the family. We were very close together, close-knit family. We lived in a house, my grandparents' house. It was a 10-apartment building, and we lived in the same house with the grandparents and an uncle of mine. Years before, we had 2 other families, relative, my aunt and my uncle. So we had a lot of people of our own, and I had cousins that were more or less the same age, 2 years older than me. I was actually the youngest one of that group, and I just always remember being with them. I had friends, but the cousins were my best friends, so I always remember that. We had other family members. All my mother's family, they all lived in Krakow, and within so walking distance. So we went from one house to another, and it was nice being together.
Okay, so we just heard again from Abraham Goldstein. He was the grandson of Meir Beigel, the great-grandson of Abraham Eliezer, and is Howard Weinberger's third cousin. And now we're going to hear from Paula Grunberg-Susswein in her interview. She's going to talk about the bakeries in Krakow, and she too is a third cousin of Howard Weinberger. She descends from that baker, Jacob Beigel, that we saw earlier, Jacob Isaac Beigel. She's Jacob Isaac Beigel's granddaughter.
You mentioned your family support itself by having a bakery.
Right.
Was it a family business?
What do you mean? My grandfather had a bakery in his house. And then when my mother married, she stayed a few years with my grandfather, and then my father moved and bought another bakery in a nearby street. So we had our own bakery. And there was another uncle 3 streets farther, another bakery. Almost all the kosher bakeries in Krakow were owned by this Beigel family.
What was the name of the bakery?
Our was Greenberg, but the other one was Levy, because the aunt was a Beigel. And in Krakow, in the Jewish section, there were several bakeries with the name Beigel. My mother was a Beigel from home, maiden name.
You mentioned your family support.
All right. Okay, so we talked about, that was a very nice description about all the many bakeries that stemmed from the Beigel family. Well, after World War II, another grandson of Jacob Isaac Beigel, and again, a great-grandson of Abraham Eliezer Beigel, he founded he came to New York, and he founded Beigel's Bakery on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, after having had a bakery in Krakow. The bakery became very successful, and it moved into a larger facility in Brooklyn during the 1950s. So Beigel's Bakery still exists today. It claims to be the first bakery to have introduced the famous black and white cookie, which is a New York City signature cookie today. And Beigel's has made over 100 million black and white cookies. And this was as of a few years ago, so it's probably a bit more. And so this is a picture of what those black and white cookies look like with the Beigel's name. The bakery today is run by 4 partners, 2 of which are Israel Beigel's nephews. So they're still run, and so the next generation is also involved with running the business. So this is a business that's still partly run by our Beigel family members, and they've continued this tradition of the bakeries in New York, and they run a very successful bakery in Brooklyn. I was also excited. So we just talked about the Beigel family, all these bakeries in Krakow, and subsequently in New York City. Well, from a different branch of the family, I was able to discover that the Beigel and Beigel Company in Israel was also founded by Beigel cousins from the extended family. So who were the founders of this company? They were the brothers Yehoshua and Yitzchak Beigel, and they were grandsons. Yehoshua and Yitzchak, they were grandsons of Israel and Abraham Eliezer's brother Yitzchak. So this is from a branch of the family that was further east in Poland, that I showed on the map. They were the orange dots. They immigrated to mandatory Palestine in the 1930s from Grabov, Poland, and then they opened up bakeries in Tel Aviv and Ramat Gan. In the 1950s, a larger factory was established, and a greater variety of products began being produced. It was around that time that the company introduced Israel's first salty snack, based on small, crunchy cakes. Now, these cakes, which are similar to pretzels in the United States, they are known in Israel as Beigel. You can say, I want to have Beigel. It's after the Beigel name. So the Beigel and Beigel brand is very well known in Israel. If you've eaten any snacks in Israel, you probably have seen snacks from this company. You can see this is their logo with the two B's and Beigel Beigel in Hebrew. And this is a Beigel. This is what they look like, these pretzel-like snacks. You can buy their products not only in Israel today, but also in the United States. In 2000, Unilever took a 51% stake in the company, and then back in 2011, they bought the remaining 49% from the Beigel family. So it's no longer owned by the Beigel family members, but they have retained the name because the name of the company is Beigel Beigel, and those pretzels are named Beigel. So I have a link here where people can learn more about this company and its history. And then just related to these two brothers, Yoshua and Yitzchak, you can see these are their Palestinian citizenship applications from 1940. Again, this is a really great resource for finding things. You can find these usually on MyHeritage. And you can see that they're both listed as coming from Poland. They're both coming from Grabov, which is that town in eastern Poland. And they're both listed with the occupation as baker. So even though they didn't descend from the Krakow branch, this was a separate branch of the family that also were bakers, and then ultimately continued that tradition of bakeries in their new countries that they were living in. In this case, they were living in mandatory Palestine and later Israel. So we're going to stop here for a second and just basically summarize all of this information. So we started off talking about Jennie Biegel and how there were very few people in her family that we knew about. This is my grandfather's maternal grandmother. We then were able to find her full siblings and half siblings, which, there were many because Jennie was one of 10 children. And then we were then able to extend out to the earlier generation to Jennie's father, Israel Beigel, Srul Beigel, and we found out that he was one of 9 children, and he had two of his brothers had descendants who became bakers, and that were continued into America and into Israel, and still exist in some format today. So that's sort of like the brief summary of all of these family members that we found. Taken all together, just looking at Menachem Mendel and Zlatomirel, the earliest ancestors, Menachem Mendel Beigel and his wife Zlatomirel, and their descendants and just their spouses, there are now 900 people associated with this family that I have on my tree. And there are still so many more people that I could add who are living descendants, who are of the younger generations who I still have not added to the tree, and who I can plan to in the future. But this is just suffice to say is that we started off not knowing much at all about this branch of the family, and then we found out so many different branches, and so it's been extremely rewarding to research the Beigel family. Been really exciting to learn about all of this. Now we're going to switch tacks now, and just for a few minutes, we're going to touch on the Y-DNA. This was part of the original presentation. I have added some more information about it here with a couple extra slides because I've done a lot of forays into Y-DNA since 2021, where I can provide a little bit more context. But again, a Y-DNA test just looks at a direct paternal line. I'm not going to really discuss a lot of the details of Y-DNA testing. You can look at some of my other presentations that discuss this. But on 23andMe, David Beigel, along with another one of his male Beigel cousins, it lists what his Y-DNA haplogroup is, and that's just a designation of what your paternal line's like ancient history. And it says that on 23andMe that David Beigel is part of EL791. Now, I have not done extensive Y-DNA testing yet on the Beigel line. This is something I would really like to do in the near future because to me it would be very interesting. But what we can say here is almost certainly David Beigel, because he got this EL791 result, that he is part of this Jewish line called EY6923, which is a subclad of EL791. And within EY6923, he's almost certainly part of the Ashkenazi subset of EY6940. So this is all to say is we can infer that the Beigel family is part of this line called EY6940, which is part of a broader subset called EY6923. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about what we know about the ancient history of this line, and hopefully we can get a lot more details when we hopefully do more extensive testing down the line. So the closest relatives to this Jewish line of EY6923 is this upstream branch called EY6926, and there are families from the United Arab Emirates and Oman. And so they share a common ancestor with all EY6923 men going back to 1100 BCE. So talking about like just at the beginning of Judaism, right around 3,000 years ago, that's when these non-Jewish testers branched off, and they today live in the United Arab Emirates and Oman. And because these are the closest connections, it's assumed that the Beigel paternal line is likely from the Middle East, going back to biblical times. Now, the Ashkenazi branch dates back to, which is EY6940, this dates back to a single paternal line ancestor who lived around 600 CE, and it is one of the largest Y-DNA branches of Ashkenazi Jews. It is found in Ashkenazi Jews from across Central and Eastern Europe, but it is rare in Western Ashkenazi Jews. So it's a very, very interesting branch compared to a lot of other Ashkenazi branches, is that it's very big, but there's very little representation among German or French Western Ashkenazi Jews. And that really is a contrast to a lot of the other major Ashkenazi Y-DNA lineages. A lot of them also have representation from Western Europe. And this will probably be discussed in a later presentation, but it suggests that, the origin of this line in Europe may have come to Europe in a different way than those of other Ashkenazi Jewish lines that came in, through the Rhineland or through, coming through the Iberian Peninsula into France. It seems like this line may have come into Europe in a different way and has a different history than other types of Ashkenazi Jews. So that in itself is very, very interesting. That's the Ashkenazi branch. There are other sibling branches, again, that are part of EY6923 that are also Jewish. So it's not just this Ashkenazi branch, but there's also connections to other branches that are not Ashkenazi Jews. So one of them is called EY102667. And in that branch, in the sibling branch, you find a Libyan Jew, a Tunisian Turkish Jew, and a Puerto Rican family. And its estimated members include Libyan Jews, Algerian Jews, Tunisian Jews, Sicilians, and Puerto Ricans. So we have a lot of different individuals that are part of this, many of them Jews today. Then there's another sibling branch called EFT227228, and it's defined by a Mexican American and Peruvian testers. So these individuals are not Jewish today, but they're in the New World. And then finally, there's a third one, EFT405052, that has a Rhodes Jewish tester as well as a French-Canadian Jewish tester. So again, people all over the world, but given this structure and its historical context, we can surmise that those Latin American, like that Mexican American, that Peruvian tester, or the Sicilian tester that are part of EY6923, they're most likely they are descended from Sephardic Jews or Sicilian Jews who converted to Catholicism either before, during, or immediately after the Inquisition. Because there's so many Jews that are a part of these other branches, it can be assumed that that's the case. And for the one that's the Rhodes Jewish tester and the French-Canadian tester, that one's still a bit of a mystery, but clearly that's another Jewish branch. Now, all of these different branches, Jewish branches, they are all part of, again, EY6923, and they have a common ancestor born somewhere between 100 and 400 CE. So the Ashkenazi branch, they all descend from someone from 600 CE. People from EY6923, they all share a common ancestor between 100 and 400 CE, somewhere in the Western Roman Empire. So given the known patterns of Jewish settlement, The most likely location for this ancestor, who most likely was Jewish, is somewhere in Italy, but it could be in North Africa or Iberia. And from this common point, right, we had branches set out for different places. So one definitely went to Iberia. That was the EFT 227228. There we see a lot of people who then converted at some point, at a later point near the Inquisition, and then came to the New World. There was one that remained largely Jewish, EY 102667, and we find a lot in North Africa and Sicily. And then there was at least this other branch, the branch of the Beigel family, right? EY 6940, that ended up coming into Central Europe and became one of the main Ashkenazi lines in German and Slavic lands. This is just a representation of that I made a few years ago, so it has not been updated, but looking at some of the common origin in the Middle East, these are the cousin branches in Oman and United Arab Emirates that share a common ancestor from 3,000 years ago, and then the common ancestor for all of the Jewish branches formed somewhere probably here in North Africa or southern Italy or in Sicily during the, between 100 and 400 CE. That was EY 6923, and they broke off into a few different branches. One of the branches is the Ashkenazi branch over here, which was mainly in Central and Eastern Europe. We do not see it as much in Western Europe. There's that one branch that was mainly in North Africa or Sicily. That seems to be over here. And there was one that may have gone to Iberia, and that, we now find testers who descend from men who came to the New World. Okay. So it's a bit complicated, but this is a line that's very, very interesting because it connects Ashkenazi Jews to Jews across the Mediterranean region. And it's the largest Ashkenazi Jewish branch to do that, which makes it quite notable. And for me personally, the Beigel family is the only surname I have found so far that is part of EY 6940. So I really do want to research it further because I haven't come across this paternal line in other surnames in my family. It makes it really special to know that I descend from it. This is a phylogenetic tree that sort of shows the different branches and where EY 6923 descends from. So here is the result that we got from the 23andMe test for David Beigel. It says L791. Well, the only really Jewish branch of that EL791 is EY6923, and within that is on the right hand side here is looking at EY6923 and its descendant branches. So we have the big Ashkenazi branch, EY6940. This is where the Beigel family is, and many other testers, predominantly in Central and Eastern Europe. So you can see all these different countries. There are a lot of testers here. You can see just from a big Y, there's over 100 people who've tested who are part of EY 6940. But then there are a couple other groups we talked about. EY 102667, that was the one in North Africa and also Sicily. So you see those testers there that are part of a sibling branch. And then we see some of the other two branches. There's one who's the Rhodes tester and the French tester, that's EFT 405052. And then we have this tester from the New World testers from EFT 227228. So this is like a nice summary of those descending branches from this Jewish branch that formed in the Western Roman Empire between 100 and 400 CE. According to Family Tree DNA as of October 2024, it's from around 100 CE. Okay. I also wanted to include a slide here just giving context for how big a line this is. This is actually I got this information from two really excellent researchers into Y-DNA, Leo Cooper and Josh Lipson. They have done a lot of research into Jewish Y-DNA lineages, and in particular Ashkenazi Jewish Y-DNA lineages. And so what I have listed here are the top 10 Ashkenazi Jewish Y-DNA lineages by population percentage. So there are actually, what we've been able to find through Y-DNA testing is that there are over 130 distinct Jewish paternal lines that trace back before the existence of the Ashkenazi Jewish community. So they formed before Jews came to Ashkenazi Europe. There are over 130 different lines. Now, out of those 130, these top 10 constitute over 50%. So it is a bit top heavy, where 10 of the 130 lines constitute over 50% of all Ashkenazi Jewish males today. Now, EY6940 is in the top 5. In fact, it's really top 2 of all Ashkenazi Jewish males. Now, it might be worth discussing a little bit about some of the other branches that constitute these lines. What I've done here is I've listed the haplogroups of all the top 10, and then these are surnames in my own family that are part of these different haplogroups. You can see there's a lot of good representation, mostly so far from my father's side. But I mentioned earlier in the presentation that my grandfather Howard, that his paternal grandmother was a Hollander, and we know that the Hollander family was from a separate branch that was also a top 10 branch that are found in Ashkenazi Jews. So my grandfather has representation in these top 10 from the Beigel family and also from the Hollander family. I do want to spend just a couple moments, though, talking about the other top 3 lineages. So EY6940 is one of the 2 largest ones at over 7% of the Ashkenazi Jewish population. The largest one is called RY2619, and that is a group of people who are have the tradition of being Levites. They are Ashkenazi Levim, and between 50 and 70% of all men who have the tradition of being a Levi, they will test within this group. It has a very interesting history that I've been able to research. And then even more interesting is this third one over here, JS12192. This is a Kohen lineage, so similar to a Levi lineage in that this is a designation that gets passed down from father to son. This one is even more remarkable because this is a branch of a much larger Kohen family that is found in almost every Jewish community today. So you look at places as far away as India, Yemen, all across North Africa, across Mizrahi lands, looking at Sfardim, at Ashkenazim, we find men who have the tradition of being Kohanim, who all share a common ancestor from around the time of the First Temple period. And it's very, very exciting. Now, not every person who believes they are a Kohen will be part of this group. And JS12192 is just one sub-branch of this tree because by the end of the First Temple, there were already, by the end of the Second Temple period in the 1st century CE, there were already 60 sub-branches of this main Kohen branch. JS12192 is just one of these sub-branches that ended up becoming into Ashkenazi lands, but there are many other branches that went to different parts of the world. And it's by far the most exciting paternal line because it has representation from Jews all around the world, and it is a tradition that's been kept for about 3,000 years intact, from generation to generation, which is really remarkable. All right, so that's the end of the formal presentation. We talked about all the stuff that we found out about the Beigel family, and then a few slides about the Y-DNA, which I would like to be able to build off of in the future. I do want to spend a couple slides looking at some appendix slides very briefly before we conclude. This is a great website called DNA Painter, where you can look at the amount of shared DNA that you share, autosomal DNA that you share, and you can use that to infer relationships. So here, you can actually type in a number here and it will tell you, but for each different relationship level, they'll tell you what the average amount of shared DNA and the range observed. So for instance, if you have someone who's a second cousin, on average, you will share 229 centimorgans of DNA with that person, but we've seen as low as 41, as high as 592. So if you see someone as a DNA match and there's 700 centimorgans, it's actually not possible for them to be just second cousins. They have to be a closer relationship than second cousins. Maybe they could be a first cousin, but they couldn't be a second cousin alone because the DNA shared would be too large. And so you can use this to infer relationships. Wanted to just include here a slide of more of the notes that David Beigel sent about the family. We included one of these slides. The second one second picture here where it mentioned Jennie, but there was a lot of information about the family, and that was written down about Srul Beigel, which is great. This is a good look of just Menachem Mendel and Zlata Miro and their children. As I said, they had 9 known children, so you can just sort of see them all laid out here. This is another family tree focused on Abraham Eliezer Beigel and his descendants. So again, this is a closer look at the different branches. I do have a good amount of these people on the tree, but you can see it was a rather large family. So one of Abraham Eliezer's children was Meir Beigel, and Abraham Goldstein. So he was the Holocaust survivor whose video clip was included in the presentation. His parents are listed here on the top, on the right-hand side of the page. This is his father, Jacob Goldstein, and seated here is Mindel, or Mila Beigel, and she is holding Abraham's older brother, who was a baby. So this is a nice picture of one branch of the family that was in Krakow, and picture is dated to 1921. And then this is also a great picture, also courtesy of Abraham Goldstein. This is a picture of him and his cousins. He talked about being close with his cousins. Well, this is him with his cousins, who are all descended from Meir Beigel. And again, Meir Beigel's father was Abraham Eliezer. They are all celebrating Purim in Krakow. And in this picture, the cousins are dressed up as personalities in a debate in the Polish parliament regarding the Jewish ritual slaughter of meat. So it was a big controversial time in Poland during this era in the 1930s, where the Polish parliament debated whether to allow Jews to ritually slaughter meat or not. It was highly controversial, and so he and his male cousins, they all dressed up as different personalities in the Polish parliament. And you can see over here, this is Abraham Goldstein in the top left part of the page. We didn't talk about him in the presentation, but Srul Beigel had another brother named Chaim Aaron Beigel, and this is a family reunion from 2021 of the Gold family. This descends from Zlata Miro Gold, who was Jennie Biegel's first cousin. So this is just another branch of the Beigel family. You can see a lot of them live in Israel. And Howard Weinberger, my grandfather, is close DNA matches with several members of this family. You can see there are a lot of potential testers here to be able to connect with, and we have found DNA connections through this branch of the family as well. And then here, I'm just going to spend a couple slides just talking about just showing relationship charts between different individuals. So before I mentioned about Jennie Biegel's half-sister Hannah, she married a cousin David Beigel from Krakow, who was descended from Abraham Eliezer. This shows how they're connected, how David descends from Abraham Eliezer and Hannah descends from Israel. And Israel and Abraham Eliezer were brothers. So Hannah and David were first cousins once removed. And then these are how my grandfather Howard connects to Abraham Goldstein, who was in the video. Abraham Goldstein is Howard's third cousin. And Paula Greenberg, she was Howard Weinberger's third cousin as well, also from Krakow. And this is how they connect as well. And then I talked about the Beigel's Bakery, founded by Srul Beigel, also from the Krakow branch of the family. And again, Srul Beigel was a third cousin of my grandfather Howard. And then finally, we talked about the two brothers who formed Beigel Beigel Company, Beigel and Beigel Company in Israel, Yoshua and Yitzchak. So how are they connected? They were Howard's mother, Freda Unger's second cousins. And so it makes my grandfather, the founder's second cousin once removed. So again, you can see how they're connected. And that is it. So we're going to stop the presentation now, and I hope you enjoyed.